Hi guys, welcome back to the channel. Well, this is a sad video to make. So the news has come through, most of you probably already know by the time that I upload this to the channel, but for those of you that don't, the very much revered filmmaker, the singular artist, filmmaker, David Lynch has passed away at the age of 78 years old. What is a shocking piece of news, really. Not necessarily given his age. I knew that David Lynch was getting on in years. He'd been making films since the 70s, but I didn't realise, obviously, that is, upon reading some of the news items, the breaking news items around this, I didn't realise that he was suffering from emphysema as a result of obviously his lifelong smoking. He was a lifelong smoker, and his health was, as late as November, recently as November, was seriously deteriorating. So not that I don't know if that's the cause of death or anything, I don't want to speculate, but I just didn't realise how much his health was in kind of relative decline. So yeah, very, very much shocking and saddening news. What do you say about David Lynch? Such an iconic filmmaker, such an important filmmaker. And I'd say probably alongside perhaps Spielberg and Scorsese, probably the most revered American filmmaker of the last 50 years, quite easily, I think. Particularly with his fans, the fans that he does have. I think he's probably the most revered and well-loved and respected film director of the last 50 years. One of the most important for both film and television, which we'll get into shortly. So I just want to do a kind of a brief video, kind of summarising my, recollecting, summarising my thoughts on the great filmmaker David Lynch, really. Started making films in the 70s, like I said. 1977, Eraserhead was his first movie, which took him famously 6 or 7 years to make. It was kind of like a student film, really, because he was AFI Academy, is where he learned filmmaking. And he made some things before, like The Grandmother in 1969, which are kind of like shorts and experimental features. And experimental being a key kind of word for David Lynch's work, really, is that kind of the abstract, surreal, experimentalist style would become a signature of his filmmaking, of course, because he is, and it's kind of weirdly coincidental how I've spoke about Lynch a couple of times on this channel recently when I spoke about Blue Velvet in relation to one of the films that Total Film magazine introduced me to. That was the film that introduced me to David Lynch's work, and probably is still the film of his that's had the biggest impact on me, because it was the first of his that I saw. But also I think it's that midway point Lynch of where it's completely Lynchian. Again, we kind of have this adjective that's named after the man himself. That's how important and characteristic and singular his work is. But also it's kind of you can watch you can kind of follow the thread of the film through in terms of a narrative. So it's not completely out there in the sense of maybe some of his later work, but it's also not The Elephant Man, or The Straight Story. It's kind of that midway point in terms of not being, so incongruous or not, indecipherable, but is also one that has his surreal flourishes and is completely him at the same time and is utterly distinct. But yeah, I spoke about Blue Velvet, and then I bought the Louis Buñuel set from Radiance, and I said that Lynch, aside from Buñuel, it's Lynch that's the most kind of well-known and important surrealist filmmaker in the history of cinema. And he certainly is, this side of the 20th century and going into the 21st, Lynch is definitely the most important surrealist filmmaker that's lived, I would say. So, it's a huge loss. So like I say, 77's Eraserhead was the one that kind of really, that is the true definition of a cult movie, right? A movie that kind of played on the midnight movie circuit, was known as a kind of midnight movie, played on that kind of the drive-in circuits for years, and really gained him a cult status right from the offset. And it's interesting to have a filmmaker who, right from the start, almost kind of made films on his own terms and never really strayed from that too much. I mean, there are kind of slight deviations, which we'll get into in a second. because, of course, the next film that he made was 1980's Elephant Man, which is, aside from the straight story, probably his most normal film. His most mainstream film. Of course, it was a huge kind of award success back in the day. 1980, it was nominated for a few Oscars. John Hurt's performance, of course, as the titular character. Anthony Hopkins starred in the film. Just a wonderfully, it's a beautifully moving film about kind of the kind of the dark recesses of human nature, really, the cruelty that we are capable of to one another, especially when the other is perceived as being precisely that, the other, or different. It's a beautifully humane work. Has its surrealist flourishes in there as well. Of course, it's filmed in black and white, beautiful photography, and has that sound design that became so distinct and associative with Lynch's work, and is I'd say it's a film I can't watch too often because it is, again, it's such a kind of, it's emotionally draining work, right, to watch, and it's such a moving film, but nonetheless it is a great one, I think. And then, of course, he went on to make a film that's obviously loads of people have been talking about recently, or the series at least, the adaptation is of Dune. His kind of very much critically maligned commercial failure, his attempt at adapting the book. Dune he made in '84, and of course Denis Villeneuve's is making 3 movies out of it since then. And I think a lot of people have probably revisited Lynch's film or discovered it as a consequence, which is always good. But I think obviously it's something he was never really happy with and never really happy to talk about after the fact because of his experience making it. And I think it's after that then you get Lynch making the kinds of films that he wanted to make, and on his own terms. Because after that, of course, came '86's Blue Velvet, which was at the time considered, at least at the close of the decade, one of the finest films of the '80s, American movies of the '80s at least. A movie which has just had such a profound impact, such an influential work on cinema. Any movie that kind of deals with the kind of, like I say, the dark underbelly of American suburbia pretty much owes a lot. As far-reaching as, say, something like American Beauty, owes to Lynch's Blue Velvet. The white picket fences, but all the while there's this behind the beauty that enables that beauty to exist. There's this dark, real dark side of society that's happening. And the kind of one is in coexistence with the other almost. And again, I think his best films incorporate this idea of a kind of deeper truth, if you like, to human existence. At the same time, they can be also these kind of weird fairy tales. They deal with both the eerie, the haunting, the surreal, the real, the dreamlike, the fantasy. They're both nightmarish, and they're kind of, again, dreamlike. Again, wonderful sound design in that film, wonderful score, one of the great movie openings as well. Great performance, iconic performance, of course, by Dennis Hopper. And one of the great films about voyeurism and the nature of watching. So it's one of the great movies about movies, in a sense. After that, I think it's only got better for him in a sense. He won the Palme d'Or at Cannes for Wild at Heart, which starred Nicolas Cage, of course, Laura Dern. Willem Dafoe is the kind of deranged Dennis Hopper-like character. But it's kind of seen some more divisive work, I think. A lot of people don't cite it as like one of the major works. And then, of course, he kind of ripped up the rule book for television, because then after that he made the series Twin Peaks, which only ran, obviously, famously for 2 series, because he wanted to essentially make a murder mystery in which the mystery is never solved. Pressure from the network obviously forced him to kind of change his hand there a bit, and almost like as a middle finger to that, he kind of then just went even more Lynchian throughout the series, right? And off the back of that, he made a prequel film, Twin Peaks: Fire Walk With Me, which was kind of critically derided at the time and dismissed, but is now seen again as one of the major works of 90s cinema, and seen as one of his best works. And then again, Lynch was not one of the most prolific of filmmakers. I mean, he hadn't made a film up to his death 20 years, pretty much, right? With Inland Empire being his last film in 2006. Of course, he made Twin Peaks The Return about 25 years after the fact that it ended in 2017 to huge critical acclaim. And I think he made two more films in the 90s, right? Lost Highway, which was probably his most full-on Lynchian yet, in terms of just delving into the ideas of the subconscious, dealing with kind of fugue states and dualities and overlapping realities, all this kind of stuff, which is kind of a film you kind of have to see, I think, because it is, again, so distinct and Lynchian, right? It's just a great way of just summing it up. It's kind of, I suppose it's a lazy critical shorthand, but again, it's just so apt, isn't it, to describe something that he's made. And then he kind of made his most anti or un-Lynchian film, and it's kind of weird by virtue of the fact that it's quite a normal film. That's what makes it weird, is The Straight Story, which is about a kind of an old man who goes to see his older brother, traveling about 250 miles across America on a lawnmower. That's the film. It's like it's a road movie in a sense, and all the weird characters, all the different characters that he meets along the way. I shouldn't say weird. A lot of them are actually relatively normal. That's the movie, and that's a wonderful little film. And that's the thing about Lynch, is that he could make surprisingly kind of moving and human stories, even despite sometimes, or in spite, because of the subject matter that he was making, actually. And then, of course, he went on to make Mulholland Drive, which was originally intended as a kind of a pilot for a TV series, which they kind of pulled the plug on. And I think Studio Canal came in and said, repurpose this and make it into a movie. You'd think that sounds like a disaster for a movie. Most people consider it to be now, or certainly critically, it's seen as arguably one of, if not the greatest films of the 21st century, so the last 25 years. It's a film to me that's best left almost like unexplained and unsaid as to what that film is really about. I think it's one of those films that can be about so many things. It's a very, very rich, layered and textured work. Of course it is. But one that nonetheless drives us all mad in trying to kind of decipher and untangle the web of what that film really is about and what it means. And then, of course, he made Inland Empire, which in many senses is even more out there than Mulholland Drive is. And I think, him experimenting, he made that in 2006, experimenting with kind of digital, shot it on video, didn't he, I believe. 3 hours long, I mean, I really liked Inland Empire, and I saw it as a kind of like a logical extension of Mulholland Drive, and that, like I said, that was the last completed film that he made. Reportedly, he was working on a series, I didn't realise, for Netflix at the time of his passing. I didn't know that. Famously, Lynch was against strict interpretations and explanations of his films. In fact, there's a great clip on YouTube of the British critic Mark Kermode, who's interviewing him, saying, "Look, I know you don't like people attaching specific meanings to your movies. You don't like it. However, I've always noticed this in your film, and in this, I can't remember exactly what it is. He's referring to something about, I think, lightning or light and dark, and is it a commentary on the kind of lightness and darkness of man or humans?" And he kind of goes into this kind of long-winded preamble for this question. He says, I don't, you don't have to pin down if I'm right or wrong, but is that kind of what you're going for in your movies? And then Lynch kind of just takes the mic and goes, "No." And that's all he says. And that is just so David Lynch. He was such an interesting character as well. Really a kind of artist, when you think about it. Again, his films, in the sense that the singular imprint that he had on cinema, but also, like I say, he ripped up the rule book for television. Very uncommon, almost unheard of for a film director to go into TV back in those days, back in the early 90s. Remember, this is the very early 90s. Whereas now it's more common in regards to... And he kind of like invented what is kind of now seen as quality television. The idea of a television series having these multi-layered, complex, sometimes unresolved, sometimes not, storylines and character development, It didn't feel utterly serialized and episodic. It you know, and it was willing to go to different places and develop these themes. And again, just the idea of Lynch putting his kind of filmmaking practice into television was certainly unheard of back then. And again, that's had a profound influence. I mean, look at something like The Sopranos and the use of dream sequences in that show. I mean, David Chase, the creators, came out and said, utterly influenced by David Lynch. So that show, for example, wouldn't be the same without Lynch's impact in Twin Peaks. So, yeah, a filmmaker who was obsessed with exploring kind of the dreamlike logic in his films and using that kind of metaphor as films as dreams, which is a kind of beautiful and I think very, very profound metaphor, I think, for, that kind of the nature of the spectator being in a kind of dreamlike state whilst watching a film. A film can conjure up an image which then, the spectator takes on an individualistic meaning, and again, that can start off your own kind of mini dream within a dream. It's again, a filmmaker who's famously influenced by something like The Wizard of Oz, and a lot of his movies are like going down a kind of rabbit hole in the sense of something like Alice in Wonderland. It's like, but and of course there's a documentary that was made about Lynch and the overlaps of his work in regards to Wizard of Oz. I think it's called Lynch Oz, right? Which I haven't seen. I think it's out by Dogwoof though, if you're interested. A lot of his films are available to buy, a lot of them through Criterion, a lot of them on Blu-ray, 4K, so including the Twin Peaks TV series. It's out on Blu-ray. So his work is readily available, and like I said, he's got almost beyond the cult following. He kind of straddles that cult mainstream divide really nicely, Lynch does. And like I said, one of the most important and impactful filmmakers of the 20th going into the 21st century. So be hugely missed, even if his productivity on the filmmaking side slowed in recent years, but last 20 years or so. But he was a filmmaker who definitely made films and his art on his own terms. And as a result of that, we can be very, very thankful, because you're not going to get another David Lynch again. That's for sure. Utterly singular filmmaker. And yeah, I mean, what can you use? Even his approach to like something like when DVDs were big back in the day, right? You got a host of bonus features. His films were always famously quite small on them, again, because he was against, I suppose, interpretation. To the point where his films, I remember, they were the only DVDs not to have scene selections. He refused to have scene selections options on his movies because he believed his movies should be watched from beginning to end. There's also a famous clip of him talking about deriding the use of mobile phones to watch movies, something that's become even more kind of widespread and even more kind of prescient of a comment in the last 20 years. But I think he made that comment when the first iPhone came out or something, that if you think you've seen a film on your phone, you're an idiot, basically. And so he was an uncompromising guy, really, and but again, a hell of a personality, and wonderful to listen to as well, if you can catch any of his interviews on his work. A guy who kind of, it seemed to be a very calming presence, but at the same time commanded your attention through that calming presence. I know he was a big fan of, I don't know what it's referred to, is it transcendental meditation or something? I'm not quite sure. But again, hell of a personality and an artist and a figure. And I mean, cinema is a far, far less interesting place without David Lynch, that's for sure. So, if you'd like to pop your memories and recollections of his work, the films that you admire the most, just any memories in general, really, of David Lynch and kind of your tributes and appreciations in the comments below, please feel free to. I'd love to hear what you guys think of him and his work. And very, very sad day, sad evening as I'm recording this, and as I found out that David Lynch has passed away at the age of 78. So I intend to, because shock horror, I've never actually seen Twin Peaks The Return or his prequel film. So on a personal note, and that's because the entire series of Twin Peaks for some reason has always kind of eluded me. It's always something I've got round to wanting to finish, because I've seen most of the original series, but not all of it. So I'm now going to make it my priority to, as a kind of tribute in memoriam to him, is to rewatch the entirety of the original series and watch the prequel film and the Return series, because it was something I was always meaning to get round to, and now I feel like this is the best time of any, in regards to the circumstances, to do so. So yeah, let me know your thoughts, guys, about David Lynch. Post your tributes in the comments, and yeah, rest in peace to David Lynch. He will be missed. Thanks for watching.